this panel discussion, we are approaching design as an industry and how and why it's important for our state to have a policy on design. It's my pleasure to bring on stage the moderator for this session first, Mr. K.T. Ravindran, who's the Dean Emeritus of RICS School of Built Environment from Amity University. Welcome, sir. Joining him, Mr. M. Shivashankar IAS, who's the IT Secretary, Government of Kerala. Architect G. Jayagopal, who's the Managing Partner and Director of Designs at Inspirations. Mr. Arun Narayan, who's the Communication Designer. And finally, a very, very special person. We are so glad to have him here, Dr. Venu V. IAS, who's the Principal Secretary of Cultural Affairs, Government of Kerala. As it has been mentioned here, he is spearheading the Rebuild Kerala initiative. It is so special to have him on the stage. But before I hand it over to the moderator, we have one more person coming on stage. He's not joining the panel, but he will be sharing with us his curator's note about this particular panel discussion and this theme. It's my pleasure to bring on stage architect Mujib, who's the co-founder and partner of Collaborative Architecture.
So before I start my curatorial note, wonderful presentation by Architect Shankar. But I guess certain things too should not go unchallenged. So I rather start a kind of a pushback on what we heard from him, because I guess these are the avenues where we should kind of deliberate on where the new architecture should progress. So one of the first things that I always say in all the forums, that overstating our legacy is detrimental to the very idea, very core of innovation that we are trying to own. So we understand we have a rich legacy, but overstating that would be highly detrimental to the very core idea of innovation that we are trying to own. And also talk about the idea of the positioning of architecture with local materials. I started my career, or I started as a student working with Ray Meeker doing fire-stabilized mud houses in Oroville. And we built a whole lot of villages across South India during this technology. That also came to, I also came to realization that the idea of mud architecture, even though how fashionable and how novel it may be, has got a very limited application, because especially when we look at the world where 70% of the world is going to be urbanized by 2050. So we started building in few villages where the idea was to get local materials and to source mud to make sun-dried bricks and fire the whole building and stabilize the building and make the building highly sustainable and highly innovative. And then we realized that we are actually taking away the land that was meant for farming. And then we have to get mud from something like 100 kilometers away, again, ruining someone else's landscape for that matter. So even though we kind of romanticize the idea of brick and mud as an alternative and kind of local appropriate architecture, it's got a very limited application in a small community. Think about a kind of an urban center where we need to house around 1 million people. And where are you going to source these local materials from? And what's kind of environmental damage that particular process going to result in? So it's time that architects have to move out of this particular notion, that the romantic notion that we found the solution for all and need to find out more innovative ways. Innovation doesn't have to stop at mud and sun-dried bricks. For that matter, a lot of our brick is antiquated in terms of the technology. The technology has not really moved up at all. We still make bricks the way our ancestors 2,000 years ago make bricks, where the world has completely changed and started making highly innovative technologies in producing low carbon footprint bricks. And the proponents of the architects, they talk about the model of the house, but they don't talk about the technology that kind of espouses that particular stuff, where I guess we should kind of revisit those ideas to put that into the central idea of innovation and how we put that into our context, especially in Kerala. So the challenge was that we were called to do, when we were working with Ray, we were called to do Dharavi, redo Dharavi with the same technology of fire stabilized mud buildings. And Ray's first instinct to it is crazy. You can't do that. The technology has a very limited application. You can't go to the urban center and try digging up clay for this entire, the entire swath of, landscape. And it'll be highly irresponsible to do that. So I guess we should rather look into that and then, do the appropriate investment in our innovative thinking. Okay, now coming back to that particular thing, so it's my privilege to be here to give you the curatorial idea about what the panel is going to talk about. I'm sorry for the digression. And I should congratulate the team behind Kochi Design Week to putting up a great show, including the vision by Mr. Shiv Shankar. And the idea that why this panel has a curatorial note, unlike other panels that happened yesterday, is because of there is a background story to it. Because we are all part of one particular underground group called Resilient Kerala, and there's a kind of policy think tank that was formed in the aftermath of 2018 flood, and I'm grateful that all the panelists present are part of the group. And design policy is something that we invest a lot of our time on the group, and a lot of energy about what we need in terms of the future direction of Kerala's development. And so I also should thank the incredible panel who were kind of spared the time and efforts to come forward to do that, to deliberate on these ideas. So quickly to go back to the idea of what we are going to talk about. These are the framework I'm going to put forward for the team, for the panel, either to amplify it, either to challenge it and negate it, or even to tweak it. I'm sure that Katie is going to do a fine job at that. So the first question that I want to ask is, all of you know that Kerala became the first state to democratize the information gateway. So Kerala is the first state in the country to announce internet is a basic human right. So one of the questions that I asked was, if binge watching Netflix is your basic human right, then access to good design should precede that. So that's the entire premise I start with. So why do we need a framework for design policy in the state? That's one thing I want the panel to discuss. How would an absence of a comprehensive policy that encompasses multi-sectoral strategies adversely impact the economic, educational, resilience, social, environmental, ecological, sustainable, cultural, industrial, information, heritage, long-term indices of the state? Because obviously the access to good design is a basic human right. What would be the objective of such a bold effort, where Kerala could arguably be the very first state in the country to have such a design policy guideline, just like what we did? We've been taking leadership role in a whole lot of out-of-the-box paradigm-shifting ideas. So why don't we have a design policy for the state? So I also come from the idea, I didn't want to take the time out of the panel, so the idea was that all this kind of discussion starts with some few slides of Cochin Airport, the Niyama Sabha building, assembly building, and say that, well, how we could have avoided these eyesores, in the state. So we also do have a national policy in the initial framework. Then when we have a national design policy, why do we need a state design policy? It's something that the panel, I would like the panel to have a look at. What are the impacts of design in the formal and informal sector? How an existence of a policy would help the latter to kind of move into the former, triggering an economic self-sufficiency and transformation in the rural sector. As kind of, we have a rich heritage of art and craft, and how would that particular thing could be put in the modern context, and how they can leverage on the larger innovative, rather inputs of innovation, and how they can bridge gaps and get and kind of bridge and move to the formal sector. How would it co-opt with our rich heritage of craft, and could we plug innovation in that sector and at the same time find a modern day breakthrough from these traditional learnings? So we are not negating the past, we really want to kind of learn from it, but put that in the context of the current times. How would we foster design leadership in all tiers, local, regional, and at the state level? How the information design thinking capable of transforming governance, policy strategies, and political agendas. That's one thing was very central, because because one of the things that was, one of the proposition that came in the yesterday's discussion was, who will bell the cat? But I'm asking, what if the cat is kind of willing to? So today, let's find out whether the cat is ready to take the bell. So there is a particular thing in the UK. It's called UK government has something called the UK Policy Lab, which the body, the entire idea of the body is just to kind of advise the government about policy design thinking. So do we need a similar kind of a body to advise government on design thinking in policy matters? Would that kind of improve our implementation of design policies and strategies? How would a framework would help us to create an ecosystem that thrives on innovation, competition, efficiency, and growth? How would such a policy would nourish our specific culture, protect our heritage, and celebrate our diversity? How the design policy would be a catalyst in enabling strategic resilience in local communities, economic, environmental, disaster management, etc. How would it help us to address the ethical side of unbridled radical innovation and disruptive technologies in the wake of AI and robotics? How would this help us to smash the silos that has been the bane of our public policy thinking and implementation? With that, I also take the last one. That's kind of the panel. I would request the panel to digress from the premise the former panels of yesterday has been deliberating on. That's kind of, they want to put design, the ecosystem that we also want to put it across as a kind of a design service sector. I say that we miss the centrality of the idea of putting innovation as the key ideas of our new ecosystem, because if we take the same route as IT industry has taken years ago, Indian IT industry has taken years ago, we rather would end up resulting in a highly compromised and inefficient ecosystem. So I would rather I'd rather request the panel to closely look at how we are divergent in terms of our thinking of putting design innovation as the central policy of the central idea of the design policy. With that, Katie, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mujib. It was a very apt introduction to what we have planned to discuss. And thank you, Mujib, once again for bringing all the major issues into the fore. I'm going to disrupt the discussion order a little bit. I'll start with Dr. Venu, and I'll then quickly move on to Jayagopal, to Arun, and then I give the last word to our IT secretary, who actually holds the key to the future of the state and perhaps the whole profession itself. So, Dr. Venu and I have had very long association, many years, maybe 25 years. And I've known him in different avatars. And I know what an excellent officer he's been in every one of those avatars. Right now, we are lucky that we have somebody who's been so close to culture and tourism is holding charge as the chief of the reconstruction efforts in Kerala. So the basic background in which we have, in fact, I would like to proceed in this discussion are two things. One is the imminent issue of reconstruction and the problems that a kind of time-bound, well-financed project situation can have in a delicate ecological environment of Kerala. And the second thing is, it's not only about just reconstruction and solving the problems of it now, but looking at the larger issues of climate change and how well prepared Kerala would be to take on that climate change issues. We are actually surrounded by two potential dangers on either side of our linear state. On one side, we have the Arabian Sea, which is likely to rise to about 6 meters more than it is at present if the global warming goes to 2 degrees. And on the other hand, we have the mountains from where we have a completely erratic climate playing itself out in massive rains and swelling rivers, and in between our developmental activity is caught. So the reconstruction approaches to the coastal areas, to the hills are going to be different. Similarly, if you look at the geographic condition of Kerala, the lower part of the southern part of the state are all areas which are very close to the sea. As you come down from Tricur, you find areas which are pretty close to the sea, and the sea level rise is going to vastly impact those areas. There are also the places where there are major estuaries, and we have been indiscriminately building in those estuaries, and that's one of the reasons why the damage has been so devastating from floods in the southern parts of Kerala. Whereas as you move up from Tricur onwards, we go into a kind of hilly kind of terrain. The land changes its character. What we generally call Malabar has another flavor. It has always had, it was always under the British, and it's had a very development, a very pattern of development that was distinct for those areas. And Wayanad, as you know, has been at the throes of the massive landslides, and the issues that are faced in reconstruction in those areas are quite different. Now, in such a very diverse condition where laterally as well as longitudinally Kerala is facing diversity in its landform, we are also going to face a huge avalanche of funding, which the government has now initiated to recover from this. And this funding is going to invite multiple players who are all eager to build very quickly and play their roles in the development of the as well. So we have highly diverse kind of challenges to be faced in the next few years through the reconstruction. And it can be very, very, very emphatically said that unless there is a cogent design policy, and these challenges cannot be met. They can be met. Money can be spent, things can be built, but what would it leave Kerala as? So it's a question of how do we protect the delicate balance between people and land in Kerala, which is the essence of Kerala and essence of its tourism, and how, as the head of the reconstruction initiative, you would like to approach this design policy as a tool for dealing with this multiple inputs which are going to come in place, so that the multiple inputs don't end up in a cacophony, but in as harmonious a possible development in Kerala. So that's the first question to you, Dr. Venu. I have 3 questions for each one of them. I will not have such a long paraphrase for each one of them. This was initial, since it was the first one, I was a bit more elaborate. Now, my second question is to Dr. Venu about his long stint in tourism, and his stint, I remember very distinctly, in Delhi when Dr. Venu was the head of the National Museum in Delhi. That's been the golden era of the National Museum. We have had some of the finest exhibitions in Delhi. We have had extremely innovative and thought-provoking discussions which are held in the museum. And we have had a very strong people-museum connect at that time. And all of us still lament the loss of Dr. Venu from Delhi and we see it as a complete loss to the museum. The new government policies have not helped that at all, that situation at all. So my next question to you, Dr. Venu, is about how would you plan to deal with tourism as an economic tool in the reconstruction process, and how would you contain the damages that tourism can bring in if it's on a war path with the place? Because we know tourism is a double-edged sword. Will it cut the branch it is sitting on, which usually it does? It destroys the environment on which it is built up, and it destroys the fine texture of Kerala's heritage if given a chance. And these systems that you have to build, infrastructure systems that you have to build for tourism, can run quite contrary to the natural systems we have in this state. So how would you deal with that is my second question. And my third question is about the people of Kerala. How do you plan to, through a design policy, ensure that there is a connect between the government and its people while they are delivering this big, quick, impatient capital into the soil of Kerala? How are you going to deal with the consequences of this kind of investment, where we love gossip? I love gossip personally. I'm a Malayali as well. And if we are not informed properly from what the government initiatives are, the newspapers and the magazines and the television channels will conjure up their own assumptions about how the money is being spent, and it will lead to a huge information gap. It's very important that through a design policy which has embedded in it communication, that we need to deal with the issues of this communicability between the government and the people needs to be constantly on the alert. It's not about advertising. It's about informing the users, the taxpayers, about how their money is being spent. So these are the three questions I have, Dr. Venu, for you. I'm sorry I took almost 5 minutes to 10 minutes to say this. Each panelist will have 10 minutes to articulate the three questions that I'll be throwing at you. Thank you, Dr. Venu. Please go ahead. Choose your order of reply. Yes.
It's always an honor to be in the company of Professor KT. I remember as a wet behind the ears officer having the temerity to approach KT, who was then at SPA, and asking him advice about Bekal. At that time, Bekal was just a tiny village somewhere, and the advice he gave me has stood the test of time. When KT, you must take this away, you must not deduct this from my time, okay? So the advice he gave me then was that if the people don't want tourism, you can't have tourism then. Tourism cannot be at the expense of the local people. This is in 1995, when the government of Kerala was planning to evacuate 1,000 families and create a new Nusa Dua, if you remember. I took his advice, and the entire Bekal project, the land was taken. We had to relocate only 50 people. So we had to redraw the whole thing according to the sage advice I received from KT. So I consider him as one of the people who's influenced me. Now to the questions, KT. Thank you. As the Chief Executive Officer of Rebuild Kerala Initiative, I am the unfortunate recipient of too much of expectations and too little delivery, right? But I see that as part of my job profile, my job description. I have two separate constituencies to cater to. As you mentioned, the first one is about immediate reconstruction. People who have lost their houses, people who need to be rehabilitated. That demands an attention that is immediate, urgent. Even as I speak, there are people who are still homeless from 2018's calamity. Now, what is the approach there? These people cannot wait for a design policy. These people need urgent and immediate and urgent intervention in their lives. They cannot also wait for government to build them houses. So the model which Mr. Shankar is so justly famous for, where we built low-cost houses, incorporating, design elements for a large number of people, not applicable in Kerala. You must remember that about 80% of people who lost houses decided that they will rebuild their own houses. They don't need government. They just said, what are you going to give us? Give us the money and let us build our houses. So all we could do there was to provide them a cafeteria, in a cafeteria approach, an array of designs which were resilient, which gave them suggestions of how they could build their small houses better, using better technology. But there was no way that we could convince them that these are the houses, these are the designs you need to make. That choice belongs to that person. However poor he or she is, when one makes a choice, one has to respect it. So people are wise, people know their situation much better than we do. 300 or more of houses which were lost in the Kuttanad belt during last year's floods are now being built on stilts. Nobody told them that you have to build on stilts. There was no policy enjoining them to do it, but they are doing it because they know that they have to be resilient, they have to build back something that will stay, even in the face of the next floods. That's the first part. So the reconstruction phase, we need to go with the people, respect their decisions and choices. The larger question is far more important, as you said. It is about the future of Kerala. It is about how we can bring in a policy that incorporates design, that incorporates elements of sustainability and resilience into our future construction, the whole construction ecosystem. Now, what does that mean? I don't have an answer for this. It means that we have to rewrite our rules. It needs a huge shake-up of the statutory framework that we have given ourselves. It means that our master plans have to be redone. It means that the building rules have to be redone. It means our licensing system needs a relook. So in short, what we need to go back to the drawing board and see how Kerala can reimagine the way we give permissions, what kind of buildings can be permitted, at what height, at what setback. This is an extremely technical matter. What I can tell you now is that the state government will be preparing a reform agenda. Some of it are already underway. But one of the key items in this is this whole revisiting the design, the planning paradigm for the state. How do we have separate building rules for the different geographical regions of the state? How do you have rules which will impose upon new constructions, setbacks and restrictions which are amenable and which are suitable for that particular region? How do you prevent construction in certain areas where we certainly have to depopulate? So these are all strategic matters, technical matters, and the state government is committed to getting this job done. We are in no hurry, Katie. People keep accusing me that nothing seems to be done. You can't do this in a hurry. We are talking about Kerala 50 years later. So if we have to plan for 50 years, then we have to have the right advice. We have to have the right people talking about the right things. The state government cannot be seen as making some knee-jerk reaction just because a disaster hit us. Disasters are going to come. As again, Shankar pointed out, soil piping is going to be a phenomenon that we have to encounter every year. We will have landslides and landslips. So when we talk about Kerala 50 years later, we need to tread the ground carefully. We need to make the right changes and ensure that the changes we make are all with an eye on sustainability. I'll conclude this point here. I'm running short of time. As part of Rebuild Kerala initiative, as part of our reform agenda which we are putting forward for ourselves, we are now opening a call to all technical experts and scholars and practitioners to advise us. What are the areas in which reforms have to be done and what kind of reform has to be done? Now, this is a call that goes out both offline and online. If you visit our Rebuild Kerala site, there will be a link, hopefully in a few days' time, that will encourage people to log in, sign up, and provide your inputs. And through these inputs, we hope to have more detailed, focused, in-depth meetings and conferences that will address the design issue and the larger planning issue for the state in a more systematic and technical manner. I have 3 more minutes, so let me just conclude by talking about the 2 other things. Do you want to intervene now?
No, I wanted to remind you about the tourism initiative,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
As well as the
Right.
people to
So I wanted to spend a little bit time on this because it's by far the more important question you asked me. Let me just take the third immediately. Now, you're absolutely right. Communication and a design for communication is sorely lacking in Rebuild Kerala now, and I'm trying to address that. I understand that there has to be a constant flow of communication about the decisions taken, about the direction taken, about the strategic vision of the Rebuild Kerala initiative. The Rebuild Kerala initiative, please believe me, is at its infancy. All I have done is to create one small document that was created thanks to the World Bank interventions. We have managed to secure the World Bank's financial aid, a very small part of what we actually need. But the excitement, the game starts now. Because by the time we were thinking about strategic shift, we were hit by the second one. So now is the time that the Rebuild Kerala initiative is opening its doors and saying that we need to have in-depth meetings and conferences that will culminate in a reform agenda. And I assure you that this whole communication about the way we are going to take, it will be participative and it will be a two-way exchange, and the whole communication needs to be transparent, and I'm committed to ensuring that that kind of an ecosystem is built and nourished. Now, tourism, that's a tough part of the question Katie asked me. Having cut my teeth in tourism, and I still consider myself a tourism person, I have no hesitation in saying that some of the most detrimental, most damaging interventions in some of the most sensitive areas in the state has happened because of this blind rush towards creating tourism properties. This audience needs no reminders of this. If you take the wetlands, it is tourism which has senselessly converted wetlands. If you take the highlands, it is tourism which has destroyed very fragile hills by senseless cutting and leveling. It is tourism that has destroyed the visual aesthetic of many beautiful places. I am not proud of what tourism has done. But having said this, I still believe that tourism offers a great way of sustainable employment generation. Now, the one key thing about tourism is that it is a people-centric industry. But what it lacks is design. What it lacks is sensitivity. What it lacks is a feeling that this industry is to be for the people and for the environment and not exploiting the people and environment. Shankar put it so beautifully. You can't build on the mountain. Unfortunately, people are building on mountains, on hillsides, on estuaries, on waterways. The architects are to blame. Now, do not turn your finger at the government and say, you guys should have regulated us better. What kind of argument is that? If you had regulated us better, then we would have given you better products. I don't understand that. I take the blame for the government. I take the blame that our lax regulatory system and the loopholes that our system had have been very cleverly exploited. But the blame should be at the door of the architect who drew that bloody plan. The blame should be with those people who constructed it. The blame should be with the guys who put the money in. For the future, I believe that the larger discussion that we are talking about bringing in more sensible, sustainable rules and regulations and licensing systems, where we will make sure that certain areas are no-go areas. And if there are areas where you can construct tourism or not tourism, any kind of construction should have the same aesthetic, should have the same design, should have the same design principles. I believe that the same thing should be applicable to tourism, and a more sensitive, more, how do I say, more design-friendly, more human-friendly kind of a design aesthetic should emerge, and that should lead the next wave of tourism in the state. I have exceeded my time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Venu. The intent was not to throw blame on the government for having done whatever they did. I think Kerala is a success story of tourism, but we also know that everything has its flip side. Kerala has a very fine texture of development. We don't have Taj Mahals and Ajanta Elloras, but we have very beautiful localized expressions of culture, and that's what tourists come here for. And I think that's what requires protection. Now that actually directly takes me to open up with my, once again, a 30-year-old, 30-year standing friendship with Jayagopal. I have 3 questions for you, Jayagopal. First one is about how do you see a design policy playing the champion of the environment? That's the first question. Jayagopal is one person who has been always a rebel. Even in college, I am told that he was a rebel. And he was also a disciple of Laurie Baker, not just a disciple, one of the people who actually directly took Baker's basic approaches to his practice and modified it in his own way. And he is one of the people who connected craft and building in a very, very effective way in the past. So my second question to you, Jayagopal, is about when we have such a big rush of capital coming in, and when there's going to be what Rahul Mehrotra has called an impatient capital at work, how are you going to ensure that the connect between the crafts of Kerala? We know that we have some of the finest craftsmen where it comes to building is concerned. Traditionally, there was no distinction between crafts and building. It was one and the same. It's the same people who did the crafts as well as those who made the building. So it was just a completely syncretic condition. We have progressively divided that through various, I don't know, it's a long debate and discussion, we won't go into that, but how do you see that this reconstruction initiative will be an opportunity for architects to connect with the crafts people and ensure a healthy craft building interface? That's my second question. My third question is about how do you take design, which is so far considered an elite profession? We know that we call things a designer, we have a designer sari, we have a boutique hotel, we have all these design connotations, kicking things upstairs and putting them on a pedestal as something which only the elite can access and approach. Now, how do you break that condition, and how do you take good design to people? It's not that people are averse to good design. Their sensibilities have been numbed by continuous intrusion by plastic and so on and so forth. We have this very lovely looking chairs in light blue color right up front. And I can tell you that this is just a cousin of the Neel Kamal chair that you find in your dentist's office. It's no different from that. It's full plastic. And where is this plastic going to go? What has happened to the craft which initially produced this? I'm not advocating going back to the past type of situation, but this is a real dilemma that we need to address. So my question to you is how to take design to people and not keep it as an elite function centered around the cities and not penetrating the countryside at all. So this is my third question. So the first question was about design policy and environment. Second was about craft and building traditions. And the third was about taking design to people. So, J. Gopal, please.
Thank you, Katie, for the question. And thank you, Kochi Design Week, for this opportunity. First of all, I'd like to bring this concept of development. Instead of the concept of development that a lot of people talk about in, say, by politicians and everyone, we talk about development. Instead of that, can we bring about a change in the narrative? And can we instead say that we bring design into a land? Can we, instead of the word development, can we say design into a land? Can we bring that narrative, get all people who are speaking about development, let them start speaking about bringing design and not development? That is one point that I felt. The whole concept of development, probably after independence, Jawaharlal Nehru took up building large dams and large industries and huge number of centralized infrastructure. And to control all this, you had the central government and state government machinery, which was also heavily centralized. And this centralized and centralized machinery with their very heavy tax systems actually had a huge, controlling effect on the whole economy, on the people, on the lifestyle. And in a way, Gandhiji, on the other hand, was talking about decentralized. And he was talking about, decentralized, village-based economy. If you are looking at present context, you don't often need quite a number of centralized, methods of generating electricity. Earlier, you needed large hydro systems to generate electricity, whereas right now you can have decentralized methods of generating electricity with solar photovoltaics. You can have water supply also decentralized. You don't need very large, city infrastructure pumping water from long distances. You can have decentralized water management systems with proper design again. We can have, earlier on cities, western cities and all, you has to have huge, centralized waste management systems. You have the sewage systems. That also is not needed. We have the possibility that waste can be managed decentralized. So if you are looking at it, even food production, now we are speaking about decentralized food production. You don't need, you can have homestead gardens, and homestead gardens can produce food if you're, again, properly designing and if you're taking care of it, if that kind of design care is there. Then ultimately it comes to building materials and raw materials for your industry. And in a way, we are dependent on quarries for a lot of raw materials, but you can have a regenerative economy. You can still go back to growing timber, and bamboo is also another material which has a huge potential with, you can use timber raw, you can use bamboo raw, But you can also have the possibility that you can have CLT wood, which is, cross-laminated timber with high pressure and with proper resins. You can make timber exceedingly dense and lightweight timber, which can build even 10-storied, 15-storied buildings or large span buildings, and all are possible. CLT wood is considered as strong or even more stronger than steel, and it can definitely replace RCC. It's RCC for the future is what we are saying. The technology is saying. Again, the raw material can be grown locally. So Kerala, with such a possibility of photosynthesis, we can grow bamboo, we can grow wood back, and then we can have decentralized production, raw material. So if you are looking at all these things, food, electricity, waste management, everything can be local. In such a case, then why do we need these centralized governments so much? Why can't we have more of decentralized governments? Why can't there be an emphasis on more local government? So again, I question Madhav Gadgil is talking about local governments controlling the economy in a way. And why can't we have that as the model forward? There is always a question of village-based economy becoming, not having the talent enough. And so there has to be a pragmatic decentralization. Perhaps a district level has a potential that you can have the right kind of talent, you have a critical mass, and you have a combination of cities and rural areas. So why can't we decentralize Kerala, design module into 14 districts? And why can't district administrations take over design of each district, and the district administration then nurturing the local corporations, nurturing the local municipalities, nurturing the local panchayats, and then regenerating, making each district self-sufficient in energy, each district self-sufficient in water, in waste management, in producing the raw material from, regenerative economy. And all our, investment can happen towards that. Why can't we channelize the whole investment that is coming from abroad into such kind of a regenerative economy? Why can't we re-strengthen our local, local governments? And these local governments becoming the strengths. And in a way, Dr. Venu right now put the blame on architects for designing it wrongly. I am putting it back on saying that it is a centralized government infrastructure systems which actually, centralize the whole economic thinking that way. And I think there has to be a total transformative change towards decentralized, economies and decentralized, probably district-based, and districts becoming the centers. And I'm not talking about a utopian concept. I'm talking about a systematic, designed change which is possible. And that is something that we can definitely initiate, a very designed change from the present towards I'm not talking about a disruptive kind of a change where, you cause a revolution and there has to be people walking out in the streets. Nothing of that sort. This has to be a very gradual, systematic, designed change. And that is possible. And Kerala can lead the way. And in a way, we have to lead the way because the whole country is looking towards Kerala to get, less of central government, less of even state government. We want more local government. I don't think I've taken too much time to answer my first question. Second question was, pardon?
You have altogether 10 minutes.
Yeah. So now coming to Katie's second question. Craft. How building and craft. Here, I'm talking about, again, Laurie Baker is my, and as Shankarji was saying, Laurie Baker is my mentor. And Laurie Baker combined design build. When he was talking about architecture, he never spoke about, architects sitting in the offices and drawing. He was always a person who actually interacted with the craftsmen. He himself led the team of craftsmen. And he actually got on into the construction part of it also, took up the whole challenge of constructing it and putting it into practice. So, the craftsman, a contractor, the present way of construction, you have the architect sitting in the office and drawing, and then the contractor doing the construction. But the contractor actually is not interested in bringing about a sensitivity at all. It's only the architects, if they have a soul, who are actually interested in bringing out that soul in the building, into the construction, into the craft. So if craft has to come, the architects also have to come down into the field. And the architects actually, like Laurie Baker, you have to have a method where architects work with craftsmen, they lead the team of craftsmen. And in a way, in interior design, it's happening. You have interior designers actually who are right now leading a team of craftsmen and actually getting on to that level. But in architecture, it's still not coming about. But there is a very good chance, very good possibility, and Laurie Baker is again a way, led the way of architects actually leading a small team of craftsmen and actually executing houses. Then you can come up with really passionate designs, and you can have so much of innovation. And each detail can be an innovation itself if the architects come down to earth and try to innovate. And Katie's third question, elite, bringing elite, it's the same architect build. If architects are coming down to earth right now, you have designer buildings and designer saris, and was what Katie was saying, and similarly boutique hotels and boutique houses and farmhouses, and only such buildings architects are able to, you can afford architects. Architects are, if they are coming down to earth and actually leading constructions, then there is a possibility that architects can actually take up small projects. Even we have built a number of flood rehabilitation housing projects because we have taken it up and we are designing it and building it actually. So it becomes in a way worthwhile for us to take up even small projects, very small works and all, because then we as architects and our team of craftsmen, we are able to come down to earth and even do very small projects, or even building rural toilets and rural waste management systems. All these things we are able to do as a team because we are an architect builder team together. So in a way that even taking up small projects become worthwhile. So that is also a possibility that architecture can come down to earth, and there can be a new method for new students of architecture where architect build is a new way forward. I think I've again exceeded my time. I'm sorry, Kiri.
Thank you. I'll request the next two speakers to also occasionally glance at the clock, which is right in front of you, so that we are able to keep a little bit of time. But it's very good that we have had free-flowing expression. It's very important in a panel discussion. It's not about just keeping time, but it's about actually inquiring into the issues which are raised, and sometimes even going beyond it, which is what Jay Gopal did. Thank you, Jay Gopal. Now, my next panelist I want to bring on board is Arun Narayan. Arun is a communication designer. He makes it very clear that he is not an architect, but he has worked for a long time with architects, as well as he has had lots of experience in working with complex corporate systems where he's been involved in system design. So Arun brings to bear different kind of skill to this panel. So I'll quickly shoot my questions, Arun, to you.
KT, for all of those, I also have limited capacity in my head. So can I request you to ask the questions one after the other?
After you answer one.
Would that be
All right.
possible? So it will also
I thought I'll avoid the opportunity for me to intervene when you are speaking. Anyway, I'll do
No,
it,
I think
I'll do it
the crowd
that
would welcome that.
I'll do it that way, no problem. First question is about he himself. I had a very long chat with him yesterday. For hours and hours we sat over some cups of tea and had a long chat. And what played out yesterday was the fact that Kerala has an immensely creative young population. That is, we have great designers. We make some of the finest cinema in the country, in the world perhaps. We have tremendous talent in the best cartoonists in the country come from Kerala. That means we not only have just mere drawing skill, but we also have critical thinking, critical political thinking, which backs that cartooning activity. And we have huge numbers of people who are doing very, very innovative design work. But most of them, yesterday we heard from an industrialist in Pune telling us that the best tooling people that he has in his factory in Pune are all from Kerala. You don't find them here, you find them in Pune or in other parts of the country or other parts of the world. For instance, Australia has a lot of them who are tooling people from Kerala. Now, my question to you, Arun, is how do we harness this talent which is there in Kerala in the reconstruction effort? That's the first question. After you finish your answer, I'll ask the other question. Thank you.
Thanks for that. I think it goes down to a couple of things. So a part of your question about why is it that we have this phenomenal creative talent, but most of it not in the state. And then there are some people who are in the state. It sort of goes into our the quality of our conversational climate to a certain extent, and to attitudes, in my view. So we are good at creativity, the creativity that thrives within the state is often creativity which is self-indulgent, which is where there's a great measure of ego, there is a measure of my way or the highway. So that is a brand of creativity that you find in filmmakers, cultural leaders. They're all about point of views, and they don't co-work a lot. Now, design as a discipline is creativity with a purpose. It is yoked to certain intents, certain objectives. We don't do that very well, intuitively. The ones who have an inclination to do that are the ones that thrive elsewhere. There is a certain mean-spiritedness to a lot of small-mindedness to a lot of conversations in Kerala, which after a point sort of puts off the best creative people. So in that sense, that is a bit of a problem. It's changing. With the younger people, they're different. They're very positive. So I work a lot with schools and colleges, and you see a sea change between people who are in their 40s and 50s and those who are in their 20s. So that's one side of it, but then you also asked about how this could be part of the rebuild project. Now, it depends on the project, but I think in these cases it's good to say what it should not be. So I readily think of two models in which that sort of big communication is done. One is a way to avoid, if possible. The other is a way that we could learn more from. But before that, we would just be grateful if you just call us in. If you call designers, or at least a certain type of designer, we labor under this perception that we are fringe practitioners, that we are people who prettify things, we are surface practitioners. we are not, we'd like to think that we're more than that. Our ability, our essential strength comes from our ability to sort of connect things that are not readily connected and connect them in meaningful ways and create optimal outcomes. So if he were to call me to help with that piece of communication, first of all, he'd be my hero. I'd be so grateful, and I would give him free hours. It would become my most important project. And that would apply for most designers. Now, how would you do it? But before that, how would you not do it? So the thing to do would be not to have large newspaper advertisements where there is a large picture of the chief minister and so on. That sort of top-down 70s kind of communication that governments still do. It just doesn't work, especially we live in very polarized times. Everybody is empowered with a Facebook account and many other tools. So just by putting, a piece of rigmarole that the government is fond of with a picture of the chief minister, you switch off a lot of people who otherwise would have been partners in this journey. Best case example, series of press conferences that the chief minister conducted while the first flood was at its most intense. Brilliant pieces of communication. I don't know if a communication school has made it part of its case study, but the man would come, he would be a picture of calm, terrible things were happening all around him. He wouldn't reflect the obvious anxiety that he's going through, his office is going through, his team is going through. He would be clear, he would be respectful, he would be humble. For a man that we know that he is, he would not be combative. He actually would he would give the central government its due. From a point of communication tone, I think that's a great model to follow. So so when I met Mr. Shivshankar the first time, we talked about this subversive Malayali sense of humor. We are subversive. We like to take the piss on everything. So we are not great honorers of hierarchies. So now that's at play at infinite levels today because we live in the world of trolls and all sorts of things. So tone is very important about being respectful, tone and techniques, but tone is something that governments don't always get very right. And the governments tend to sloganeer and they tend to do top-down things. Now, from a parallel world of the corporate universe, I made a living for a long time making corporate identity systems. And one of the things that we deliver at the end of that engagement was a brand guideline, which says put a logo here, don't put white space around it, don't put anything near it, and so on and so forth. That world changed recently when one of the biggest brands in the world, Google, said that we don't have one logo. Our logo is what you make of it every day, and Google's logo is out in the world. It's a marker of how the world has changed in terms of your ability of hierarchies to control messages. So you need to embrace the possibility that everybody can make a message the way he wants it to be. You need to play along with, so you need to have that openness. So I think that those are things that one could learn from in that piece about communicating.
So I'll come to my second question very quickly. You have also been a heritage activist. He's been in the forefront of the INTAC activities in Palghat. But he has not been just involved with what we call built heritage, but he's been largely involved with the creative side of Palghat, which includes all sorts of art forms and various events and various types of expressions, starting from language to music to theater to kind of worship forms and rituals and everything, even the rhythm in which we speak. They're all part of our cultural expression. He's been a champion of that. Now, how do you find heritage, and I'm not talking about just built heritage, generally in heritage, how would it evolve when this kind of large capital is going to come in? How would it confront globalization? To an extent, my criticism of what the event that we had yesterday, I'm sorry, with my apologies. I would say that I couldn't bear to sit and watch it, because the finest and most evolved forms of art and, the performing arts of Kerala was being performed as if it's a kind of Bollywood dance sequence. There was strobe lights running all over the place. It was awful. It was very painful for me to see it. So I went right up to the back and I kept myself busy with my phone. So in other words, we have actually modernized very awkwardly in the initial stages. But now we are coming of age in terms of our modernization. I can tell you that having been on many juries in Kerala, I can tell you Kerala is now producing some of the finest modern architecture. So from this perspective, how this confrontation between a local culture and globalization, how do you see that playing itself out in the imminent future? Arun, I have one more question for you after this.
Yeah, I'll be quick about this. But I'll just, I just feel I'd like to defend the children from yesterday for a bit. They're from Bolgatty, so I feel at some level I need. So that it wasn't a professional...
It's not their fault.
No, it isn't. So it was a piece of poetry that they were going to school and to art school. So they were trying to bridge the two. So it's a piece of poetry that they needed to learn as part of their schoolwork. But then their teachers helped them turn it into dance. So that while it was a little bit of a pastiche, that's probably because you didn't stay till the end. That was the explanation they gave. So at that level, so anyway. Now I think your question goes to confrontation. So I don't think there is a confrontation. It goes to creative voice. So we had a creative voice, as Architect Shankar was talking about. We were very confident in exercising our creativity, which embraced all aspects of our life. There was a distinctive voice. It had values. There were values of evolved simplicity. There were values of being in touch with nature, of using what you needed and not more. Returning to nature what has already been used. We had a voice in how we used color, how we used forms, shapes, in all sorts of ways. And the contrast that we talked about was how we could create a beautiful garment which was all white and it had just one sliver of color, and how that could be exquisitely beautiful.
Like Dr. Velu was wearing.
How I'm so grateful he's doing that today. So we had all of that till the other day. So our houses, our towns were a sea of white. The way we intervened into nature took into account that we had a resplendent nature. So we didn't need to add to it. So in everything we had a homegrown aesthetic. It wasn't entirely homegrown. I don't want to be nativist about it. Now, while you proclaim loudly about our achievements, there is a tendency to be too backward looking. And that is a journey that tends to be sort of isolationist and small. The nature of life is to move forward. So you move forward, and globalization is a reality. The connected world is a reality. And while your politics may differ from that, we have to deal with that. Now, globalization is a sort of a global cocktail, and we all work in that. We participate in that world. We can't do that by just doing our thing. We need to do everybody's thing. But then in doing everybody's thing, there is an ineffable way in which we could bring our point of view, our sensibilities, in the way that the Japanese, for instance, do, where they might design jeans, they might do buildings, they might do a whole lot of things, but then at an ineffable level, you know that there is a cultural identity at play. We can reclaim that. We started dressing in funny ways and painting our houses in purple and sort of having weddings that look like Bollywood films. It just happened recently. We still have, it's possible for us to sort of reconnect with our core. And the example that you cited about architecture also is at play in the world of communication design, where everything was elitist and English-speaking till the other day, but now, especially in the Hindi hinterland, you see advertising, for instance, that's very coming from the Indian idiom and so on. So when markets open up and that world of consumption opens up, there is a bit of a confusion. We all go a bit mad. But I think now we're at a stage where we now will sort of, we've kind of had enough of that. Now we start using our idiom. So it is not exactly about conservation. So I do work with art conservation and things of that nature. But as a larger thing in terms of, in the context of a project, I think it's at design schools and so on. It would be good to sort of orient the next generation of designers on what is the essence of our identity, what is the Malayali mind and what formed it. So if those things are there, then I think without actually, using bricks or using tiles or so on, there might be ways in which we can be global and Malayali.
So I think it's a much larger discussion, which we can continue outside. I don't want to spend more time on it. And my third question to you is about creating creative jobs for the future. Yeah? I'll just paraphrase it a little bit. Now, we know that artificial intelligence is going to impact the way we work. And the first jobs which are going to go when robots come and take over the place are the mechanical jobs. A human being being a part of a machine chain, large number of factory employment and all is in that format, where people don't use their brains, don't have to use their brains, but they have to mechanically correlate with the production process. Those are the first jobs which will go. And the second level of jobs will go when the computers become more intelligent would be the jobs in which there is thinking, rational thinking that's required, and connect through rationality. Now the last type of job to be hit is the creative job. Yeah? It's the intuitive capacity of the human mind. It's the intuitive ability of the humankind to articulate their culture as objects and forms of expressions and so on. Those are things which are not going to be challenged very easily by mechanization and electronification of our production process. From that perspective, can be very safely said that the future job market belongs to the creative people. If you're not creative, you can be replaced by a machine. That's what we are coming to. From this perspective, how do you find us creating the impetus for Kerala, the youth of Kerala, to get themselves trained into new jobs? We know that our school curriculums have left out crafts and art, and they want to learn more maths and physics and chemistry, and we're just creating cannon fodder for the industry, human fodder for the industry, and we are ignoring the creative side of education. Now, in the perspective of the reconstruction of Kerala, and in perspective of the long-term climate change issues which are going to come into Kerala, how do you see this creative harnessing of the creative power of the youth of the state playing a good role, creative role in building up the Kerala ethos? Sorry for a long question, but I very unfairly expect a short answer.
The short answer is that Kerala will produce those creative professionals, regardless of whether we do it by design or not, because I think we are culturally very suited to sort of excel in the alleged coming creative economy. So we have the apparatus to excel. But we could probably stop doing a lot of unhelpful things at a systemic level. We grew up in schools which had art teachers, which had drawing teachers, which had craft teachers, which had music teachers. Government schools don't have that anymore. They have, at best, they have a cluster of schools which could borrow an art teacher of indifferent quality once a month or once a quarter. Ideally, they avoid it. And they fill it up with more physics and science and competitive exam classes. So it is a strength we had even in less prosperous times. We used to, in some manner, foster creativity at the school level. There was an ecosystem in our villages and towns which fostered, there were libraries, phenomenal work in shaping the modern Malayali mind. Nowhere in the country do we have that sort of apparatus. They don't function anymore very well. There were many cultural organizations, film societies, all those institutions that used to make a youngster who was finding his mind or shaping his mind have sort of stopped to be. And they're all now either trying to enter the IIT JEE exams or they're obsessed with electronic devices and the sort of degenerate stimuli that comes through that. So at the schools level, and this is at the schools level, but also at architecture schools, which is the closest to design schools we have at some scale in Kerala. There is a paucity of good design teachers. Architecture schools, now dealing with creativity is an imprecise sort of activity. You need to expose people to all sorts of things and trust that he will make the connections and make something of himself. Whereas the left-brained sort of disciplines allow you to be measurable and you can produce a certain number of results which then go up on a billboard as your outcome and so on. So we are taking away things that we had as against strengthening them. So that I think at a systemic level, if we could realize that the world is changing and those jobs that you're making big bets on are going to be gone. On the other hand, there are new professions that are emerging, like museum curators and all sorts of things. New professions where these people could make wonderfully fulfilling lives, often being in the places they love being in the villages and in the towns. We hate to leave Kerala. We leave only because we have to. Many of these professions they can do these things at home and at home or where they. So I feel at some level, if the education ministry, there was some thinking on that aspect that you need to design for a future where creative professionals probably occupy the high ground of the economy or might be somewhere on the top. I think instead it will happen on its own, but with the government doing the right thing, it might happen with more purpose and more impact.
And more substantively,
more
sustainably into the economy itself. Right. Thank you very much, Arun. Now I move to our last panelist, and perhaps one of the most important panelists. Mr. Shivashankar is the IT Secretary, and it is under his initiative, his ministry's initiative, that this entire exercise is being held. At the onset, I'd like to congratulate you and the Kerala government for initiating a discussion on design. It's unheard of anywhere in India. In most other states, they're still chasing cows and things like that. They are not looking at design. Here we have a government which has now begun to look at design, and this is a great opportunity for us to relocate ourselves, both in the long term and the short term, in the cultural ethos of our own country. Yeah? And as I just described a little earlier, technology is often seen to be playing a contrary role to culture. It is seen as creating sameness. It's seen as something that will wipe out individualities and so on. Please give me 10 more minutes. Yeah? I was told that we have another 15 minutes of extended session. That's right. Yeah, right. I'll be very quick. No, I would like to just... there are other questions. Yeah, all right. So I'd like to continue the discussion with Mr. Shivashankar. My questions to you is, how do you find in future IT industry and the innovations in the IT industry interface with the crafts products of Kerala? Yeah? To Jay Gopal, I had asked about the relationship between building and craft. Now I am asking him the relationship between innovation in IT sector and its relationship with craft. That's the one question. May I shoot off the other two questions? And the next question is that Kerala also has a very big startup initiative. We had a whole session on startups yesterday, and unfortunately that just boiled down to using startups as corporate fodder. because they were like large companies looking at how to actually use these people because they're more flexible, they think more freely, they have less capital intensive, and so on, how to use them for the larger marketing and so on. Now, there is a larger role for, there can be a larger role for innovation and among the startups. And my question is that now, for instance, startup business is driven by individual initiative. Yeah? It's small textured, it functions from small offices, not from big glass buildings, but from small offices with low capital input and huge long working hours and so on and so forth. And it has a different texture of development. Now, how do you harness this highly individually motivated, young, creative, innovative people to serve the larger social purpose of the state? Yeah? How do we use them? How do we harness that power? Not simply to provide fodder for the corporates, but to subserve the social purpose of the state. How does the government harness that? This is my second question. Third question is the future of workplace itself. We know that the future of work is being hotly debated across the world, because we know that there is going to be larger and larger replacement of manpower by machine power. There will be larger and larger machine thinking which will replace human thinking. There will be larger and larger amount of innovations which will render the kind of huge buildings and large workforce and big paperwork intensive governmental structure and so on, it will render them almost ineffective. Yeah? So in such a scenario, how do you find the government, which is the largest employer of any place, and more than being largest in size, the most consequential employer? Because government is our, as we say in the north, is our maa baap. It's the only trustable institution which a society has is the government. Yeah? And we need to strengthen that institution. Is that institution looking at this issue of disruptive influence of technology on the workplace? In which case, how do you see design of governmental structures, their buildings and their systems, and the systems thinking about how government departments function, etc. How will they play themselves out in the light of the new challenges thrown at the workplace? Sorry, this is my third question, and thank you, Mr. Shivashankar.
I think Katie had asked all of us to keep looking at the clock, and I was so happy that the clock had practically shown 00, so I thought I could escape the questions and the answers as well. But since you have asked these three questions, I will just try to summarize it as quickly as possible so that the audience also would like to interact with the panel, that space can be given. So, the Design Week, the Kochi Design Week got curated by, and that also I need to clarify, Mujib was mentioning that we have a resilient Kerala group, which is a think tank which works undercover. It's only a harmless WhatsApp group. There is no, it's not a covered group or something like that. So this group keeps chattering, we keep talking about all our hopes and aspirations and all, but nothing actually comes out of it. So we are on safe territory. We keep, it's a form of expression. In that group, Mujib asked a question, why is IT department doing a design week? And I responded saying that there is a reason for doing that, and that's the only thing which I would like to answer as the three questions together. Why IT department got into the design week organization was purely because of necessity. As Katie had indicated, we have a very vibrant startup ecosystem in the state. And I have around 2,300 active startups, out of which 70% are unbelievably, for Kerala, working in the hardware sector. They are actually in the hardware startup scenario. And for the hardware startup scenario, they would require two things. One is the embedded system design and all, which they know well, because that's the technology part of it, they know well. But once you design this whole product, you need to, once you design it technically, that the product design part of it is done, then this product needs to interact with a larger ecosystem. And that is where the importance of design came in. The importance of design, both in terms of its making appeal, it making its presence felt, point number one, and two, importance of design to ensure that the unnecessary components do not go into it. It becomes sleek and functional. It becomes cost effective type of stuff. So that is where design came in. Then when we looked around, we found that in India, we really don't have people who can give that type of design inputs. So I was telling Christy Fernandez the other day, we had, and that will answer your second question, Katie. We had one company, one startup, which is making Bandicoot, which is the manhole cleaning robot. And they try to replace the sanitation workers, the manual scavenging work type of thing. Now, when they designed this product and had the proof of concept ready, to convert that into an actual product, it would have cost, when they did the maths, they found that the product would have weighed something like 640 kilograms. And that's a fairly mighty machine that you can't really move it around. So we sent them to Taiwan. They went to National Technical University of Taipei. They were there for four months. And at the end of it, they got inputs from there by which they could reduce this whole machine size from 640 to something like 220 kgs. And then they came back, they had this 220 kilo things tested out, and then they improvised locally, sitting here in Kochi, in an office. And now the machine weighs just 60 kilos. So that is the improvisation which is happening. That is where design has to play a part. So we decided that these type of startups, other very interesting example is, you all know Nipah virus hit us last year. It was a huge problem. One caregiver, one nurse actually lost her life because she was exposed to this. So one of my hardware startup companies is now working on a product that in case of such very dangerous epidemic type of stuff, can an ICU ward be manned only by robot nurses? He already has the product. He has a robot nurse who will actually give, take this thing and administer it and all. But then the point is, that nurse, that robot or whatever type of this thing will have to be very, very appropriately designed. Because it should not actually replace the nurse totally. For a particular purpose, it has to be very, very appropriately designed. There is a lot of design input which needs to go into that. A patient would definitely welcome a human interface there. How do we replace that? What is the design component of that? So design is very, very important to my new generation startups. That is why we got into the design week. That is why we started working on this. And we are working only on those startups which are not corporate fodder. We are working on those startups which work on those socially relevant interventions. That is where design would make a lot of difference. For the startups who are going to feed the corporate type of this thing, there is a separate process which will happen. The corporates themselves would give the design inputs of stuff like that. So this is primarily what is happening with design, startups, and startups' role in this whole thing. And as I was mentioning, this technology change, the change in workforce, this is all going to be reality. So there will be some levels of automation, some levels of new work forms which are going to happen. Dr. Venu here, I know he's one of the very rare officers. For all of us working in government, our big issue is that we keep writing notes and letters and all. There are two ways you can do it. You can type it onto the computer, or earlier system was that you had a confidential assistant or a typist to whom you will dictate it, he will type it and bring it back. Then you would be confused, what is this note? This is something totally against what you have dictated, because you would have heard it differently, you would have typed it differently, and would ultimately give a very different version. Now he uses practically a dictaphone. and that gives you an input or an output at an entirely different level. Now, this is the type of technology adaptation which is going to happen, and this will actually change a lot of jobs. But at the same time, you require a new set of jobs which are required. The whole point is technology is going to change the way we are all working. We will get a new set of requirements, and these new set of requirements would require a new set of people. The existing sets of roles, some of them would go away. But then the whole point what we are trying to do in Kerala, because of this creative ecosystem, because of this talent ecosystem, is to ensure that we are able to get into that mode where the new jobs are going to get generated. And those new jobs would practically be accessible to our local children. So we have, along with this event, a parallel event happening on harnessing blockchain. And blockchain for financial sector is something which we are seriously discussing, and we have a program where we are training 20,000 kids in blockchain technologies. And blockchain type of technology, if we can really train 20,000 people, we will be the talent capital for blockchain and an area where we can make a play. So the whole design dialogue is very, very critical into this context of ensuring this transition happening smoothly, and this transition happening completely and effectively and meaningfully. And it is very important in the Kerala context. That is my submission. I can't but not respond to one thread which was there earlier. That is about, you mentioned about art forms being curated and performed in a slightly, whether it is good, bad, or this thing. And Dr. Venu mentioned about architects, somebody, the Bakel project also was designed by a creative architect. Somebody had designed that. And Mujib mentioned about buildings which are eyesores. They were, see, the man who wanted this performance the evening yesterday, my colleague, would have just said that we want an evening performance. Then that is left to the person who is delivering that performance. He curates it. And if he curates it badly and gives a bad product, that's it. Similarly, when you ask an architect to build a assembly building or whatever it is, you are saying that I want a building where so many people can sit and conduct this type of business. Then if something very grotesque comes out of it, and whose problem is that? So the fundamental element is, I love being part of these panels because in these panels, representing government, we get a lot of advice, what government should do and what government could be doing. The point is, this needs to be a collective responsibility of everyone in the society, every professional in the society. Unless that happens, we will keep listening to this and we will keep having such discussions. And ultimately, you will all people say that government is absolutely, not proactive enough. And we all had great dreams of how to transform this thing. Government has not done anything. But government has a certain role which it can play. The larger role would have to be played by individual, responsible professionals who are sitting here. In you people, we have a great hope for Kerala. As he was mentioning, when he talks to youngsters in schools and colleges, the message that comes out is very different from the message that comes out when he talks to people above 40 type of thing. Since everybody in the panel is above 40, I think we should not be talking anymore. I think we could call it a day. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I thank all the panelists. We have had a brilliant, well-informed thinking panel. And thank you for those fantastic responses. Thank you all. And